to our session here in General Mathematics. So for today, we are going to discuss about exponential functions, focusing on the domain and range of exponential functions, their intercepts, zeros, and asymptotes. Those topics are all under graphing exponential function. So our objectives are the following, of course, to represent an exponential function through its table of values, graph, and equation. And then to find the domain and range of a given exponential function and to find also their intercepts, x-intercept and y-intercept, their zeros, and the asymptotes of an exponential function. For our table of contents, we have three subtopics that we're going to discuss. First is about the notations, the set notation and interval notation. The second one is about the graphs. So the graphs, visually, how do we graph exponential functions, and the asymptotes of these functions. The third one is to look for their intercepts, x-intercept and y-intercept, and how do we look for them and their zeros. So before I continue with my presentation, there is a periodic link down below that you can access to join with me in discussing kasi there would be asynchronous replies from you para meron naman tayong onting interaction, hindi lang tayo manonood ng video. Okay? So you can click on that periodic link and then reply on our periodic prompts here on our presentation. So for the first one, let's go to notations. We have there the set notation and interval notation. Here are our 5 examples for determining their notations. For the first one, let's have the exponential function y equals 3 raised to x plus 2, where your 3 is the one being raised to x plus 2. On our periodic prompt, which among the 4 options do you think would give you the proper set notation for their domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to express your domain in set notation as x such that x is an element of R or element of real numbers. And then we have the range to be y such that y is an element of real numbers. But then we have this limiting value here where your y should be greater than 0. This is because any number you put here as your x or any real number you put as your x, we cannot have a value of y to be less than or equal to 0. Ang meron lang na makukuha natin, kahit anong ilagay natin as x dyan, ang makukuha lang natin na y value, it's always greater than 0. Not even equal to 0. So knowing that set notations for the domain and ranges, how do we determine the interval notations for the domain and range? 5, per the prompt, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to express this as negative infinity to infinity as for your domain, and then for your range to express this at 0 and then positive infinity. Let's have the second example. We have the function y equals 1/4, where your 1/4 is raised to 2x. Which among our periodic options would give you the proper set notation for their domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to write it down as x such that x is an element of real numbers and range y such that y is an element of real numbers, again limiting your y to be greater than 0. Again, it's because we cannot put any value for x in our exponential function that would give us the value of y to be 0 or lower than 0. Knowing this, which among our options in periodic would give you the interval notation for your domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to express this as negative infinity to positive infinity for the domain, and then for the range, we are going to express it like how we expressed our number 1 earlier, 0 and then positive infinity. Let's have the third example. We have their f of x equals 3 raised to x. Which among our periodic prompt would give you the set notation for the domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to write it down, your x such that x is an element of real numbers, but then your y would be expressed as y such that y is an element of real numbers, where your y is greater than 0. Knowing this, again, which among our interval notations would give us the correct domain and range for this function? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to write it down as negative infinity to positive infinity for the domain. For the range, 0 to positive infinity. One thing to note about the interval notations, if we're using parentheses for and then we have a constant number, that means we're not including the number in our solution. If we use a bracket instead of parentheses, that is the time that we're going to include that constant number in our solution. In terms of the infinity is always partnered with parentheses to indicate that it's never ending. Let's have example number 4. F of x is equal to 4 raised to x plus 1. 4 is the one being raised to x plus 1 minus 2. Which among our periodic options would give us this proper set notation for the domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time's up. Correct answer is to express your domain as an element of real numbers, and your range is also the element of real numbers, but you have your y to be greater than negative 2. Diba? Kanina, bawal yung y to be equal to 0 or less than 0. This time, we have the limit of y greater than negative 2. This is because we now have the constant of negative 2 in our function. So, ang technique dyan, pag may range ka ng exponential, titingnan mo muna. Pag yung number lang, tapos may exponent na variable, or mga ganito kanina, yung examples 1 to 3 natin, y is always greater than 0. Pero if you have a constant na nakakonect sa function mo, tulad nito, negative 2, that would be the value that you're going to input in your range. Knowing that, which among the interval notations do you think would give us the correct one for the domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to write it down as negative infinity to positive infinity for the domain. And then for the range, negative 2 to positive infinity. Let's have our last example for the notation. For our set notation, which among the options in our peer deck would give us the correct answer to describe the set notation for the domain and range? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Again, I told you kanina na pag may ganito, yung ganito lang, yung ganitong example lang, we're going to express y to be greater than 0. Correct answer is to express our domain as element of real numbers and then to express our range as element of real numbers where your y is less than 3. It's because we have a negative exponential expression there, which is negative 2 raised to x minus 1. Later, we can check if our answers for the set notation and interval notations for domain and ranges are correct by graphing them. So, ito muna. Try natin muna to determine ano kaya ang interval notation given the following set notations here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Correct answer is to write it down as negative infinity to positive infinity for domain. And then for range, negative infinity hanggang positive 3. So with this, let's try to explore the graphs to double check kung tama nga ba ang mga nakita nating patterns and kung tama nga ba yung pagsusulat natin ng set notation and interval notations for their domain and ranges. So for the graphs, again, we have the same 5 examples na kinuha na natin ng domain and range. For the first one, let's have y equals 3 raised to x plus 2. We have there the domain and range na sinagutan natin kanina. You can join with me on our peer deck to try to graph this manually since we have the peer deck prompt there of drawing anything on this slide, or you can just listen to me as I try to graph this exponential functions. Try to just indicate values first. If we have x is equal to 0, that would give us 3 raised to 0 plus 2, which would give us 3 raised to 2, which is 9. So I have the ordered pair 0, 9. Or in table of values, I can write x as 0 and then y as 9. So I can graph it here. Let's say I'm just going to put the interval of 2. So tigda dalawa. So 2, 4, 6, 8. I can put my 9 in the middle of 8 and 10. So that's 0, 9. Let's have another point to include. We're going to have x equals negative 2. So if we have x is equal to negative 2, this would give us 3 raised to negative 2 plus 2, which is 3 raised to 0. 3 raised to 0 or any number raised to 0 except 0 would give us 1. We have the ordered pair, negative 2 and 1. So we can put this in our graph as negative 2 over here sa x natin. Tapos 1 sa taas. So we're going to jump over here. Negative 2 and 1. Let's have another value. What if we have your x to be equal to negative 8? So if we have 3 raised to negative 8 plus 2, this would give us 3 raised to negative 6, which would be equal to 1 over 3 raised to 6. So naka-fraction tayo. So with that, I'm going to estimate this. So dahil ano tayo, x is equal to negative 8, di ba? So negative 2, negative 4, negative 6, negative 8, somewhere here. And then we're going to have 1 over 3 raised to 6 as our y. So it's somewhere along this line. Naka-fraction kasi siya. So most probably over here. So with that, we can connect our points already. And if we connect the points, we're going to have the graph something like this. Can have the graph something looking like this, okay? So parang meron tayong continuous na pababa ng fraction over here, and then continuous na pataas ng value on over here. So with this, ang graph natin would be this one. With this, let's try to analyze the graph first. We said that the domain is the element of real numbers, so ranging from negative infinity to positive infinity. We can observe in this graph here that your graph extends on both directions, meaning umaabot siya ng negative man kung ano man yung value na yun for x, and then umaabot siya ng positive infinity for your x here, x-axis. How about for your y? We have their y greater than 0. So you have your y-axis here. On your graph, if you're going to still extend this and include more values, you're just going to have a graph looking like this, diba? So sa y-axis natin, it's always greater than 0. Kasi itong graph natin, it would never touch this x-axis and it will never go to this area of our Cartesian plane. So hanggang dito lang siya. Dito lang siya sa part ng positive y-axis, not touching ever the negative part of our y-axis. So with this, you can continue asynchronously graphing manually the exponential functions here. For example, number 2. We also have another one here, example number 3. Examples number 1 to 3 are parallel. How about this? Let's try example number 4 as my graph. Let's have a value of x is equal to 0. This would give us 4 raised to 0 plus 1 minus 2. Which would be equivalent to 4 raised to 1 minus 2, which is also 4 minus 2, giving us a value of f of x as 2. So we have the ordered pair, x is 0, y is 2. So going to our graph here, let's jump by 2's again. So we have there 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. We have also here 2, 4, 6, 8 for your x-axis. So with this, 0, 2 is over here. We have the x0 and y 2. So, dito yan banda kasi nagja-jump nga tayo by 2 eh. Next one, let's have another value. What if our x is negative 1? Let's try to express our function pag negative 1 naman yung x mo. 4 raised to negative 1 plus 1 minus 2 would give us 4 raised to 0 minus 2. A number raised to 0, that's 1. So, 1 minus 2, that's equivalent to negative 1. Now we have the ordered pair, negative 1, negative 1. And in graphing that, so in between nito, tsaka nito. So, sa gitna. Tapos, then, this one and this one. So, it's somewhere along here. Since ang talon natin is by 2, we can include our point to be somewhere over there. So, what if we have a positive 2? 4 raised to 2 plus 1 minus 2 would give us 4 raised to 3 minus 2, which is equivalent to 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64, minus 2 is 61. So, somewhere along, sobra na sa Cartesian plane natin. So, somewhere sa taas natin. So, paano pag negative 4 naman si x? So, we're going to have 4 raised to negative 4 plus 1 minus 2. This would be 4 raised to negative 3 minus 2, giving us 1 over 64 minus 2. So, somewhere along negative fraction tayo. If we're going to solve for this, we're going to get negative 127 over 64. So, parang ano yun? Negative 1 and 63/64. So, hindi siya tatama ng -2. So, somewhere along, di ba, -4 to. -2, -4, -1/64 is somewhere here. Here you go. So, -1/64. With this, we can connect our graph to look something like this. Okay? So, our graph, true to our domain and range, it can be a real number, any real number for x. So, sakop niya yung buong x values. Pero when it comes to your y, nakalimit lang siya to be greater than -2. Not ever touching this point here, which is -2. Yan. Not even touching the below values. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya nagkakaroon ng value ng -2 pababa pa. So you can also try this with another example here. We have example number 5, which is parallel to example number 4. So summarizing everything, we now have the graphs of each of the examples that we were solving kanina. So graph of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the respective graphs that you see over there. So let's now try to determine the asymptotes of each graph. When we say asymptotes, these are values na palapit ng palapit yung graph mo, pero hindi siya tatama doon or hindi siya sasakto doon sa value na yon. So let's try to observe first. For the first one, we can observe na it never touches, even if you zoom it pa, as in zoom nyo pa yan sa Desmos or whatever graphing you use, it's not ever going to touch this axis. Yan, yung x-axis natin. For number 2, yan, this one would never going to touch also your x-axis. Yan. Number 3, also your x-axis, same with the examples kanina. It may look like that it's going to touch the x-axis, pero if you're going to see the table of values, it would never have a value that would touch your x-axis. So, how about example number 4 and 5? For example number 4, we can observe here that it gets closer and closer to -2, but it would never touch -2. And then we have here, for the 5th one, we can see that it gets closer and closer to +3, but it would never touch +3. With this, we now have all the graphs and their possible asymptotes. If you want to double check, you can include more values in your table of values to see kung tatama ba talaga sila dun sa value na yun or hindi. So dahil dyan, we can write down our asymptotes to be y equals 0, and y equals 0 for the first 3 kasi it would never touch y equals 0 na value, which is equivalent to your x-axis. And then for number 4, it will never touch y equals -2. So yung -2 dito sa baba. And then yung for number 5, y equals +3. So somewhere here sa positive. So, a clue to determine, tulad ng sinasabi ko kanina, if you don't have any constant connected to your exponential expression, your asymptote, it's always y equals 0. If you have a constant connected, -2 and 3, such as this, connected to your exponential expression, your asymptote would be the constant themselves. So, for number 4, y equals -2. And then for number 5, y equals 3. To determine kung greater than ba yan or less than, you of course have to look at the graph. So kung ito, knowing na ang graph natin ay somewhere above lang yan, so it's always greater than -2. For this one naman, yung y natin, it's below 3, so i-express na natin yan as y less than 3, and so on. So that's it for the graphs and asymptotes. Let's now move to looking for the intercepts and zeros. So here are again the 5 examples, sticking through to our 5 examples para we can see the patterns. For our intercepts, we have the corresponding graph here sa taas for reference only, pero we're still going to solve for our intercepts. So let's look for our x-intercept. To look for x-intercept, your y should be equal to 0. So pasok nyo yan doon sa taas. 0 equals 3 raised to x plus 2. Meron ba tayong maiisip na x value that would be, pag ginad natin sa 2, tapos pag ginawa natin siyang exponent ng 3, ang makukuha nating value is 0? Paano ma'am pag -2 yung x natin? O sige, let's say hypothetically, we have 0 equals 3, -2 plus 2. This would just give you 3 raised to 0. 3 raised to 0 is 1 and not 0. So you can do trial and error to look for this, pero there is actually no number that no x value na pag inad mo sa 2, tapos ginawa mo siyang exponent ng 3, ang makukuha mong value is 0. So, ibig sabihin yan, for our x-intercept, there is none. Next one, if we're looking for our y-intercept, baliktad naman, x equals 0 naman. So, gagawin nyo, x equal nyo sa 0. So, dun sa function natin, we have y equals 3. Yung x, instead of x, it would become 0. So, plus 2. This would give you y equals 3 raised to 2. Kasi 0 plus 2 is just 2, which is equal to 9. So, we have the y-intercept. I'm going to write it as ordered pair, as 0, 9. So, ibig sabihin yan, if we're going to observe the graph that we have over here, your graph touches this point, 0, 9. Kaya meron tayong y-intercept na 0, 9. Kaya wala tayong x-intercept kasi the graph would never touch your x-axis. Okay, for the zeros is just another term for your x-intercepts. So, since ang x-intercept natin is none, let's try this one. You can try and guess in our pair deck which among our options would give you the correct intercepts and zeros. For this, example number 2, let's try to look for our x-intercept first. So, for x-intercept, that's y equals 0. 0 equals 1/4 raised to 2x. If we're going to explore this, kahit mag-shift solve tayo sa calculator, wala tayong makukuha for x-intercept. It's because wala tayong number na pwedeng ipasok dito. Pag may multiply sa 2, tapos ginawang exponent ng 1/4, ang makukuha natin is 0. So, wala for x-intercept. For y-intercept, x should be equal to 0. So, y is equal to 1/4 raised to 2 times 0. And don't forget the parentheses. Muntik na siya magmukhang 20. This would be equal to 1/4 raised to 0. Any constant number raised to 0 except to 0 is always equal to 1. So for our y-intercept, on ordered pair, this is 0, 1. Looking at our graph, saan ba siya tumama? Sa 0, 1. And then for x-intercept, none, kasi it would never touch the x-axis here. And then for zeros, sa zeros natin, kung ano ang x-intercept, yun na din yung zeros mo. Dahil wala dito, edi none din. Let's have example number 3. Example number 3, you can try it on your own to see if you can solve now for intercepts and zeros. I'm going to skip this. Let's go to example number 4. Example number 4 tayo. Let's try to look first for the x-intercept. So, y equals 0. F of x is also equal to y. Yan. We can express f of x as y also. So, pasok si y equals 0 dun sa function. So, 0 equals 4 raised to x plus 1 minus 2. So, to get a value of 0, dapat ang makuha nating value dito, dapat 2. Kasi kung 2 to, we have 2 minus 2, which would give us 0. So, we can solve for this using 4 raised to x plus 1 equals 2. Yan. Ano kayang value of x ang pwede natin gawin para mahanap natin itong 4 raised to x plus 1 equals 2? So, solving for exponential, they need to have the same base. So, we can express this as 2 squared and then multiply dun sa previous exponent equals 2. Now, they have the same base. We can equate their bases. That's going to be 2 multiplied to x plus 1 equals invisible 1 here, so equals 1. Disregard the bases, equate the exponents. In solving for exponential equations, solving for x, we have 2x plus 2 equals 1, which would give us 2x equals negative 1, where your x values is negative 1 over 2. X-intercept, that would be negative 1/2, 0. X-intercept, same with 0, so I'm just going to write it here. Zeros na rin yan. Okay, on our graph, we can observe that it touches negative 1/2 and 0 dito. Ayan, negative 1/2 and 0 touches our x-axis on that point. Next, what if we're looking for the y-intercept naman? So, pag y-intercept, your x should be equal to 0. So, pasok mo yun doon sa equation. That will be y equals 4 raised to 0 plus 1 minus 2, which would give us y equals 4 raised to 1 minus 2, which is also equal to 4 minus 2. In simpler terms, if we perform this operation, y is just 2. So, for our y-intercept, this would be 0, 2 as an ordered pair. So, 0, 2 yan. Makikita nyo sa graph nyo, it also touches 0, 2. So, ang ordered pair natin, ito yung pinapakita. So, ito yung x-intercept touching the x-axis. Point a graph that touches the x-axis, that's the x-intercept. Point of the graph that touches the y-axis, that's your y-intercept. Let's have another example in solving for our x and y axis. So, dito naman tayo. Example number 5. Let's try to look first for our x-intercept. So, for x-intercept, y equals 0. So, f of x is also y. So, pwede ko nang gawin niyang 0 equals negative 2 raised to x minus 1 plus 3. Okay. To have a value of 0 dito, dapat itong exponential expression ko equal yan sa negative 3. Kasi negative 3 plus 3 would give us 0. So, dapat maging equal to sa negative 3. So, I can write this down to be negative 2 raised to x minus 1 equals negative 3. Now, it's our turn to look for the bases and to solve for the value of x. So, kailangan same base nila. We can see here that they have the different base. Yung isa naman negative 2, yung isa negative 3. So, kailangan ma-express natin sila na pareho yung base nila. To look for the value of x here, we're going to apply the principle of logarithm. Now, logarithm is under our next examples, pero this is still solvable, don't worry. Yun nga lang, under na to ng next lesson natin. So, for item number 5, we can still look for the intercepts and zeros by looking at the graph instead of solving it. Kasi nga, under na to ng logarithmic. So, the next lesson na natin yun. So, with that, we're done with our domain and ranges. Under graphing, we have the notations, set builder notation, and interval notation. And then we have the graphs, yung plotting natin, table of values, and then the asymptotes, and then the intercepts and zeros. Value of x when y is 0 would give you x-intercept, and it's 0. Value of y when x is 0 would give you the y-intercept. So with that, we're done with Chapter 4, Lessons 5 to 6. You can input your questions in our peer deck prompt since asynchronous tayo for the peer deck interactions. So that's it, and I'm going to see all of you for our next lesson in General Mathematics. Bye, guys!